mean, war is the pursuit of political goals, so the politics of it is always there. And you have the mainstream media, which, I won't be as bold as what the president says about certain channels and publications and things, but they do have basically a rule of thought. And so making the administration or making even war actions look as bad as possible, but it's undeniable. It's an assault on my critical thinking skills to listen to the narrative that was trying to be spun about, well, you only did this, you only did that. Like, there's so many elements of strategic victory here that are, of course, the program being rolled back, and it was never to destroy the program. So then they just lie about, you didn't achieve your goal. The goal was stopping the clock, halting the clock, pushing it back. So the nuclear scientists that were killed, the sites that were destroyed, the equipment that was destroyed, the narrative that was destroyed, that Iran could just negotiate in perpetuity and get economic benefits for that. It's frustrating as just an objective analyst that the narrative that was trying to be spun for political reasons. Like, if you can't see the political reason for some of these outlets to start immediately after the operation. Oh, look at the satellite imagery. You didn't do much. It's pretty frustrating because there are some people that just don't have the time to understand, that they work in other fields, that's about as wrong. I mean, that dog don't hunt, as another president used to say.
Welcome to another episode of the J100 Podcast, brought to you by the Allgemeiner. I'm your host, David M. Cohen. What if everything you thought you know about modern war was wrong? What if the headlines you trust, the experts you follow, and the narratives you've internalized were not just incomplete, but dangerously distorted? Today, we speak with someone uniquely positioned to cut through the noise. John Spencer is a leading global authority on urban warfare, the chair of urban warfare studies at West Point, a retired U.S. Army major, and a scholar who has dedicated his life to understanding and teaching the brutal realities of modern combat. He studied every urban battle since World War II. He's been to the front lines, including the streets of Gaza. He's emerged as one of the most credible, clear-eyed voices, speaking truth to power in a time of moral and military confusion. In this episode, we go deep. We talk about the October 7th attacks and what they exposed about the fragility of the modern state. Israel's response, not just militarily, but morally, in an age where fighting terror earns you condemnation. The Iranian threat, and why this war is not about borders, it's about civilization versus barbarism. Now, propaganda is one of mankind's deadliest weapons. John Spencer doesn't posture. He doesn't politic. He speaks from experience and from conscience. This is not just a military analysis. This is a wake-up call. How we fight, what we defend, and why the West must reclaim not only its security, but its moral clarity. If you're tired of the noise and ready to hear the truth from someone who's earned the right to speak it, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. John, thank you for your time, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me back.
Before we, really jump into your areas of expertise and commentary on world events, I just want to get a little bit of background. If you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit with our audience, a little bit just where you grew up and kind of what inspired you to get into this. I know you started off as a soldier, but what inspired you to kind of jump into this whole area, this whole foray?
So I joined the Army after high school out of Richmond, Indiana, a small town in the southeast Indiana. Mom worked 3 jobs to raise 3 kids. It was what really I bought what the Army was selling, the adventure, the travel, the college, and I spent 25 years active duty Army. Had an amazing career all the way up to getting an education at master's from Georgetown, working at the Pentagon, being an advisor for a 4-star, teaching strategy at West Point, created a research center, and then traveling the world in my current job, which is to research war, active wars, or recently concluded wars. That work had brought me to Israel many times to study everything from ancient warfare to the wars that were going on. I was on the ground right after Operation Guardian of the Walls in 2021. And then once October 7th happened, of course, I wanted to study the invasion and the attack. I had been studying urban warfare for over a decade at that point, and then I immediately saw the lies starting about Israel. And I was, to be honest, a little bit shocked at some of the lies that were sticking. everything from, just misinformation about urban areas like Gaza, the densest place on earth, to what the definition of proportionality is. And it became really a personal endeavor of this is not right. The truth should matter. Of course, I have friends in Israel. I love visiting Israel. And there was a part of that as an old soldier, the values of, they're killing my friends, and I lost friends on October 7th. But it really became I was the person in the room with the knowledge, having studied it for so long, how what was being said was not true, whether it's how the laws of war work, what weapons you can use, how do you protect civilians, to the actions of the IDF. And as a war researcher, I got on the ground quickly and traveled into Gaza with the IDF, observing their operation, which just, motivated me more because I was watching them struggle in the greatest urban warfare challenge in history. And in the world every day saying things that just weren't true. So I have young children, and part of my motivation as well has been I don't want my children growing up in a world where the truth doesn't matter and you can just say anything because it's Israel and the world believes it. And we see, the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States and everything. So it's a long story of how I got there, but I was in with great knowledge comes great responsibility. And I was raised a certain way, especially even in the military. Like, you stand up for what's right, you stand up for the truth.
So this is we have a certain commonality, although the Allgemeine, we're different types of soldiers, right? We're soldiers on the field of media, and we're fighting that battle for truth in media, which you're alluding to. We all just read about last weekend in England. There was a big concert, and one of the performers, who thankfully has been banned from performing in multiple countries subsequent, started a chant that was unfortunately followed by many. Death, death to the IDF. When you hear something like that, what is that? How does that make you feel? I mean, the ignorance out there about what the IDF role is and what they're doing is astounding.
Yeah, no, it's astounding. One, in the stupidity of these people without identity, without values, without moral integrity, that try to reach fandom by hating the Jewish people and inciting violence. And I live close, so I live in Colorado, close to where what happened in Boulder very recently. Jewish, Israeli, and others marching just for the release of the hostages, and they get firebombed and basically versions of flamethrowers and Molotov cocktails. So, of course, it angers me. I believe in justice as well. I believe in civil justice. So hopefully there is accountability for actions, because I believe in that. But yeah, the comments about the IDF, I mean, that's like the pinnacle of the lies that become chants, that become incitements to violence. So it's very problematic. Hopefully there are severe repercussions, not just canceling of concerts and canceling of visas, but real consequences. Because again, I've studied it long enough to know that it starts with the Jewish people, but doesn't end there. So this is anti-Semitism, anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, but it's really anti-Western. It's not who we are, and it should be condemned globally.
I appreciate so much you framing it in a larger, broader context than just the Jewish people or Zionism or even Israel, because it does, I think, go much deeper. Sadly, it will have repercussions way beyond what we're seeing. I'm going to start forward and go backward, if that's okay, because we're talking on a day where President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are going to meet in the White House about 6:30 p.m. this evening, give or take, to discuss the war in Gaza, to discuss the surrounding environs and a broader peace. What are your thoughts in terms of, obviously, like, it's a very complex situation, and there are competing values, and you sadly can't accomplish everything like in one fell swoop or at one time. But there is kind of reporting coming out that President Trump, who we're deeply indebted to and grateful for helping with Iran, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But how do you see this at this juncture? Let's say Israel trying to wrap up this war. It seems like it's not really complete. All the goals have not been accomplished. I would say Hamas still seems to be holding on in Gaza to some degree, although there are conflicting reports about that. How do you kind of see this out or see this through from your perspective? What would be the ideal way to see this out?
Well, I mean, I think Israel has done an amazing job, despite the campaign of misinformation that has come from the halls of the United Nations to all around the world, to be honest, not based on reality, not based on facts, based on baseless claims that became political action by some nations that should have accountability within themselves. I understand, as somebody who studies war, the difficulty Israel faced in achieving its goals in Gaza, the just goals, despite even the fact that it's Israel and this double standard that I've come to tacitly understand of Israel in war, even after October 7th, I have some kind of apprehensions on what's the realm of possible. Of course, we're everything from Syria joining the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia, the Abraham Accords. There's a lot of things that can happen immediately. I don't have all the information on Gaza, although I follow it day to day to know what's the realm of possible. But from what I'm hearing, even the Prime Minister Netanyahu is very, as he should be, committed to, of course, anything that can be done to assist on getting the hostages released immediately. But Hamas cannot be the ruling power. Well, you have, as we're talking, they're in Qatar going back and forth on a 60-day ceasefire deal. I think this meeting is broader than that. I mean, it is hard for people to understand the last 2 years, almost 20 months or so, of operations against Gaza, the historic operations against Hezbollah, the initiatives that can be done in Lebanon and Syria and with Iran. You had the Israel doing operations again against the Houthis yesterday and the day before. There's so much to be discussed, and so we don't know. I know that in order to keep Hamas from power, right, and we've seen a lot of signs of very positive things. We even saw recent signs of basically religious clerics going against the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria, which are saying they should recognize Israel and they should give up the pay-to-slave program. Those are amazing. Lots of stuff going on, but in Gaza, to keep Hamas from power, there ultimately has to be a different power in place. Lots of ways you could do that. And the work that's been done lately, as you have clans volunteering to fight Hamas, you have the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation working to feed the people. But I have a lot of understanding of the task still to be done. Even if there's some type of new deal done and Hamas agrees to even exile, how much work would have to be done in Gaza? It's some people want a quick end. Wars don't end quickly. Of this unlimited goal like this of removing their power to start the de-radicalization, the reconciliation, all of that, and then for Israel to the cost that Israel has paid economically with the loss of soldiers. There's so much to be discussed. So I'm very hopeful. I mean, I think what is the third visit for the prime minister, more
Yeah,
than
it's incredible. Yeah.
any other world leader period since President Trump took office visiting. So these are generational issues though, right? The Abraham Accords are generational. What's been done against, I'm sure, like you said, we'll talk soon, against Iran. I mean, these are historic moments, so it's hard to keep up.
It definitely is hard to keep up. If I'm understanding you correctly, on the one hand, you're saying obviously there's so many moving pieces and this is so vast and it's not quick. Sadly, it's not a quick resolution. But how do you deal with the situation? On the other hand, like if there were no hostages, I think Gizzo would clearly just finish the job type of thing. Because of hostages, I don't know what your experiences have you dealt with like situations where there are hostages in urban warfare and things like that? I'm not as astute and educated as you are historically, but I mean, how do you maneuver that in a way where you win on both ends?
So I mean, really, it's hard, right? So winning and losing in war is hard for people to understand. You do compare it against the goals. There are very few situations of this scale with the hostages, right? So the density of the urban terrain, the type of organization that Hamas is ideologically, politically, militarily, what the society being radicalized. Of course, we have, of course, the Iran hostage situation for us that was horrible and protracted. There was an incident in Chechnya with the Russians. We had hostages in World War II that were retrieved out of the Battle of Manila in 1945, but very rapidly. It's a very unique pressure, but people believe that the goals are counterintuitive, right? So you want the hostages back, but you want Hamas out of power. Hamas says it will give hostages back for certain things, although if the history of Hamas shows anything, is that they don't do things out of almost rational thought. Like, of course we should give the hostages back. So for these reasons, they're always gaming their ultimate goal, which is the destruction of Israel, and for them to maintain power. So it's really hard because there is the goal, which should be that Hamas cannot rule the Gaza Strip. So, in one sense, winning would be those three goals being achieved for Israel. And whatever the other side will say, they won something. It's very hard, but there is a way to move forward on each one of the goals without giving them up, which is societies go to war, not militaries go to war. So this is for the Israeli people to decide, and they may decide. And this is the polling and everything, which I understand, of course, studying war, that the society may say, look, that we paid too heavy a price. We just want this to end. We want the hostages home. And that goal of removing Hamas as the political power and starting to de-radicalize the population things, you just don't know.
Who is running Hamas today? I mean, do we know who's in charge of Hamas today? Because I lost track after all the different eliminations of their various, temporary leaders. Do we know? Is there
Yeah,
some?
there's been some interesting, very recent reporting about they tried to use the last ceasefire agreement to kind of re-put themselves back together, both politically and militarily, right? So Hamas is a political organization, but it doesn't exist as what we thought it was on October 6th, right? The entire military leadership is gone. I think there's one person, like the entire organizational chart, that's still alive, to include people that were ghosts for decades, like Mohammed
Right.
Def and Mohammed Sinwar. These people those are gone. So you have, but it is a political apparatus. So you have lots of new recruits, which are just the radicalized youth, right? So the average new Hamas member is like 16. It's crazy. But they've tried to hold it together. But there's been some recent reporting that with Gideon's Chariot and the operations and the loss of Mohammed Def and there's a couple other very senior old Hamas leadership that they're really struggling to keep it together. And you have the clans, you have the protests, you have the humanitarian aid. It's still a group, right? Because you don't eliminate political apparatuses like this, power structures, right? Hamas is a power structure. And
Oh,
it's really struggles to maintain power right now, but it has the guns, right? So the AK-47s, let alone just the rocket supplies and things that it doesn't really have access to. I can't point to names of people because right, what we thought it was on October 6th, it's
right.
gone. That part of it's gone. It doesn't mean that its power is completely gone, because this is really where it's hard for people to understand those differences of Hamas as a military, as a political organization, and then who on the street in Gaza City is the power. And I dealt with this in urban environments like Baghdad. Like, you can have like a national figure, national government, but the person who's controlling the power in that neighborhood of 70,000 people is known very well. And if you get out of line, there is this fear society aspect, which is what Hamas is. They rule by fear, and they putting up some recent posts of even like Gaza Humanitarian Foundation workers, because it relies on local workers, that they're torturing and things like that, because they're based out of fear. So it's there, and it only goes away if you replace the power.
Got it. Okay, before we jump into Iran, I'm just going to ask one other quick question about Gaza on October 7th, at least for now. It seems to be it's such a dichotomy. On the one hand, Israel has been so successful post October 7th in eliminating all of the different proxy threats, has had such great accomplishment. And yet, on the other hand, there's still that terrible taste of October 7th. From your perspective as a military expert, like, how does that happen? How do you have such a incongruity in terms of such a debacle that obviously opened up the doors to great successes? I don't deny that. But I guess it's hard to fathom that such a successful, sophisticated military apparatus that's had so many incredible victories over the last 18 months or so had such a mammoth failure on October 7th. How do you, kind of from your standpoint, wrap your head around that?
Sure. And I did study that a lot. And I know a lot of the leading or contributing factors to October 7th, right? Which is a massive, in Israel's history, as much as the Yom Kippur War, I mean, a massive intelligence failure, right? So that's a given. But I know of many of the contributing factors, from the tactical to strategic, right? So Hamas was relegated to the least threat to Israel's survival. It was a containment strategy. And again, I was there on after the Guardians of the Wall, when Hamas broke the last ceasefire and launched rockets. It was a failure of imagination on what Hamas could do. And yes, there was like a report 18 months in advance called the Jericho Wall that said what they wanted to do. And there was, the young soldiers who saw them training, things like that. There was an over reliance on the technology of the wall, a failure of imagination on the size of the enemy that could do the hit. But it was a sign that Israel had disengaged and had relegated Hamas to a lesser threat, with Iran being the greatest threat to Israel's survival, and then Hezbollah with its army of rockets and fighters, even the Red One Special Forces fighters. I understand that, but societies also get complacent, right? So even the gun, and the security control in the envelope and the kibbutzim's security guards and where their weapons were, like there's so many factors to this. I understand the years of planning, investments, even psychological work that was done by Hamas to try to convince the world that they didn't want war, right? They just needed more humanitarian aid, more concrete for their tunnels, and then they would be fine, and they would leave everybody alone. There's so many levels to this. There's also, it is much easier to attack than it is to defend. So if you sit on, and you're defending whatever, a border wall, whatever, the
Right.
enemy will always find ways to get around your defensive. Now, attacking is a lot easier. So what? And you said eliminating. That kind of keyed me. Israel hasn't eliminated any threat at this point. It has defanged and weakened many threats, right? So it deep. Even Israel didn't think it was possible with Hezbollah, with the death of Nasrallah, with the elimination of 80% ish of Hezbollah's rockets, but it's still there. They just defanged it, eliminated most of its leadership hierarchy, and it's an amazing operation. Hezbollah is still around. Iran is still a threat, but it has burst its kind of strategic invincibility concepts and pushed the nuclear program back. I understand many of the things. Yes, a giant intelligence failure, but it was also a failure of imagination. It was a failure in thinking, of even security and things like that, that I know will change Israel in every way, not just the military, the intelligence services, the society. And as we're speaking today, Israel is stronger as a nation on every level than it was on October 6th.
You said something, John, just now that really kind of reframed for me, and I've been thinking about these issues obviously for a long time, but I actually just had a new insight that I haven't had yet, which is cool. And maybe it's very simplistic, but what I understood you saying, and I never thought about this, was that it's almost as if it would on October 7th, led by, even though it was led by Iran, obviously on some level, but I mean, like a direct hits from Iran or direct from Hezbollah on October 7th, maybe would not have happened because Israel was so prepared for those larger threats. But because of Hamas is kind of like, because they were underestimated or not seen to be such a massive threat, because of that weakness, that's why they were able to be so successful. If I understood that correctly, I never thought about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that dealt with where Israel, every nation, and Israel's a small little nation in a very rough neighborhood where everybody's trying to kill them and
Right.
erase them from the map. There is a limited amount of intelligence capability, limited amount of military tech capability, things like that. And of course, priorities turn to where you invest. So, of course, what we saw again, what was done against Hezbollah, not just the pager and walkie-talkie operation, but the elimination of the entire leadership. And then what was done to Iran with the elimination of the IRGC leadership and all the aspects of that. That's years, if not decades, of intelligence work, military technology development, and all of that. So yes, absolutely, because Hamas was relegated lower, and they were like, there's very little Israel human intelligence in Gaza before October 7th, just because wasn't the highest priority of the threats. Of course, you had the Gaza division on the wall, and you had all these investments in the wall and things like that, and the Iron Dome. There were 4,000 plus rockets launched on the morning of October 7th. That's more than ever has come out of Gaza. That's more than that was launched during the entire Second Lebanon War. Israel was ready for some things, but there's always gaps. So yes, there is that. But I won't say, because had Israel, like on October 8th, attacked Iran, or after Iran attacked in April of 2024 and October of 24, nobody can look back and go, well, now we know that you could have done this, this, and this back then. No, what Israel has done and navigate these strategic waters of making these decisions with very limited knowledge and uncertainty is part of the story. Because had they made different decisions in different sequences after October 7th, it might not have gone this way. Hezbollah might have launched tens of thousands of rockets and had success in overwhelming the Iron Dome. So there is sequencing here of
Right.
decisions that were made with limited resources that is unique to Israel as well.
Is that so? That's a great question too. I think, like, in the sense, like, okay, I'm a religious person, like I believe a certain, divine intervention, but even from a strategic standpoint, like, was it almost like Israel obviously knew what levers they had to pull in these different places, and they consciously held back because they knew that the sequence? Like, how do you almost see it? How do you perceive? I mean, it's obviously there's this, it's a partnership of the human and the divine, but I'm curious, like, was there actually like consciously, there must have been consciously holding back. Okay, we're not going to pull that lever yet. We're not going to do this yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've interviewed the prime minister 3 times now, and I don't do politics. I don't do even personalities. I do strategic decision making. Absolutely. There are many points actually since October 7th where Israel's leadership through, the collection of the war council and the military political leadership, but even the prime minister himself making decisions with very little bit of information, like going whether they would head south into the Gaza envelope and focus on Hamas, or head north to what the greater threat of Hezbollah, if the Hezbollah would have launched, to how do you respond to Iran while navigating the United States. To be honest, I mean, it was an election year for the United States after October 7th. So even guarantees and decisions that were being made, we now remember, like, don't go to Rafah, you have to do this, you have to do that. All these decisions being made at a moment in time with very limited resources, and sometimes without assurances on what would happen after you make that decision. And that's why you have to understand what a decision is being made. And I hate this ability to go back and go, well, if you would have done this, something would have been different, without all the context of that exact moment, to include, people calling world leaders, calling Israel and yelling at Israel for doing something, and Israel having to make a decision for their own survival and knowing the consequences of that decision. You're right. There's a greater explanation than just the data you have available. Some of this is just intuition of decisions being made by incredible leaders, but there's something else as well. And I've come to find, like, there's no explanation for Israel's success in most of its wars. I mean, from the 6 Day War to Yom Kippur War to this war, there's something beyond like just military understanding that it doesn't make sense that Israel has this success. Like, there are other factors for sure.
From your perspective, like Hezbollah, Nasrallah, Iran, like what would they maybe have done differently? Again, if they had to go back, what would you think, what would they maybe have done differently now, kind of seeing how things played out? Where did they kind of mess up
Yeah,
strategically?
absolutely. I think, especially with the wild card, so Iran's, nation states make decisions based on their survival. So they're making a lot of decisions on, if I do this, what do I think not just Israel will do, what will the United States do, what will do all these other countries do? When you talk, but Hezbollah is the card on where they got to make decisions, and whether they made them right or wrong, even Hassan Nasrallah's decision not to go join October 7th like it was planned. I mean, they found bunkers prepared to do October 7th attack on northern Israel, and it would have been awful. It would have been catastrophic. But for some reason, he made a decision at the last moment. And of course, with Iran, because that connection is undeniably, he didn't blow his nose without Iran's permission. But then he also made more decisions as the war continued, like pulling back the Redwan forces before Israel entered southern Lebanon, meant it didn't, without knowing that would lead to Israel's great success and Israel's operation. Without his information, even his decision to be in his bunker on that evening that the prime minister was headed to the United Nations, they all get to make these decisions that, and war is like, strategy is making decisions under incredible uncertainty and complexity. You don't know what decision's going to lead to what. So you're right, in especially Hezbollah, but also Iran. When Iran attacked in April and October, it did certain things, what it targeted, and thought it was going to get away with things. And all of these decisions led to their loss, Israel's win.
Okay. Amazing. Let's talk about the 12-Day War, and let's talk about Israel, Iran. We'll call it round one. I hope it's the last round, but it's unlikely. What surprised you most about how things went down, about America ultimately joining the fight? There was clearly a lot of tension internally within the United States government, thought leaders, different sides of the Republican Party, shouldn't, etc. What surprised you? What did the timing surprise you? Did how things went down surprise you? Did America's intervention surprise you? I'd love to hear your insights.
Sure. So one thing with studying Israel is I've come to get comfortable with not being surprised at what Israel is able to do. Although the world should be in awe of, like, the opening operation, which I studied in detail. Just that will be studied in war colleges around the world. It changed the paradigm of multiple aspects of deep intelligence penetration, the ability to text the IRGC military leadership and get them to believe that they were talking to themselves and come to a meeting. And that was the opening night when Israel then blows up a meeting that they called, that the Mossad called themselves, and the IRGC generals believed it, to the insertion of the drones that took down the air defenses, which allowed almost the entire Israeli Air Force to be in the sky that night on the opening night of Operation Rising Lion, not Tiger, Lion, and to hit what they hit, to curtail the response, to there's just so much aspects of just the opening operation. It's like, and I wrote about this. It would be like going back to World War II and then taking out the entire German military leadership and Heimer and all these guys before the first boots touched the beaches of Normandy. It's just just the incredibleness of it. As you fast forward, as the Israel was very, very smart in the operation, because understanding the war, and again, how different, like a war like Gaza, to remove a power, which is what we call an unlimited goal, to a limited goal. Israel was very clear, never strayed, although it made comments within the information operation world of like, if regime change happens, it happens. It's not on us. But the fact that they kept the goals limited to roll back the military and ballistic program, the clear and present threat, communicated that daily. And then, of course, you fast forward to the United States under all the pressures of the U.S. administration about the scar tissue of wars and forever wars and all this junk of faulty comparisons, to take the leadership to assist Israel in achieving the global goal, which is to prevent the Islamic regime in Iran from having a nuclear weapon, and to do Operation Midnight Hammer. And in of itself, just an amazing operation from the American standpoint of sending B-2 bombers in a different direction because you can see everything, to what was a part of the package. It wasn't just the world's best stealth bomber or anything that the world has seen, but the fourth gen, fifth gen fighters and flying with it, the bombs that were used that were designed for that Fordo nuclear site to be able to penetrate and put 12 30,000-pound bombs in a hole down a ventilation shaft the size of a refrigerator. Just the technology of that is awing, right? But the leadership decision to do it and to communicate to the American population, like, we did this for this reason. It was conclusive, and it forced a decision immediately, which in word, these are the aspects that people don't understand, the nuances of how different or how impressive it is to take an action that leads to an immediate goal, which is, war is an act of force to compel your enemy to do your will. The United States joining Israel in its just very dominant military operation. I mean, Israel controlled Iran's skies. Nobody, if you would have talked to anybody last year, and you could say, yeah, could Israel control Iran's skies and hit what it wants at will? Like, no, that's crazy. Iran's this giant nation of capabilities, has all these, just that.
Iran have an air force? I mean, like, this is like crazy.
Well, not much anymore. Well, one, the world should have learned in Ukraine, but now they should really know that you shouldn't buy Russian air defense systems. It won't work out well for you. But especially when you're going against Israel, who is, again, everybody's impressed by the operation. I'm impressed by the operation, but I also understand that it's decades of intelligence work that led to that, even in the nuclear sites and being able to hit that. But the United States, I'm extremely proud of the United States, of course, joining in the operation. That was historic, because that nuclear bomb, Iran was developing a intercontinental ballistic missile. We were already sanctioning Chinese companies that were trying to help them get to that. They were testing ballistic missiles of like two kiloton that could reach Europe. It was a threat to the world. So I'm proud that we stopped the foreign policy insanity of giving Iran billions of dollars and say, could you please stop trying to destroy us, trying diplomacy, trying economic sanctions, and to take this action. Incredibly impressive military operation, 12 days to get to a limited goal, to the point where Iran is calling the United States saying, okay, uncle, we would like to end this. And of course, Israel paid a heavy price for that in the loss of life and the destruction of sites. Now we get to see what the new Middle East looks like, because all of this adds up to a new Middle East. All of Israel's impressive ability to achieve the unthinkable, not just, with, like we were talking about at the beginning, with Syria helping defend Israel by knocking drones out of the sky during the 12-day war. All these aspects that the Israel is in a better place today, and now the Middle East is in a place. You have the United States forming alliances with Gulf states in historic economic deals. You have Iran weakened. Now it gets to make decisions about going forward, but there's a new strategic policy, like with Israel. Like Israel will strike if it views a threat again, which is also part of the, whether it's the Begin doctrine or just the new Israel doctrine.
Let me ask you a question here, John. It's, I'm not even going to ask you, and I don't want to get political. I'm not even going to ask you, like, if a Democratic president had been sitting, uh, in the Oval when all this went down, which obviously could have been the reality. But even if, let's say President Trump, tragically, had not moved his head, and if there would have been even any other Republican president who had never been in the Oval before, I guess what I'm asking is, like, does it take the gravitas of being a second-term president? Does it take the gravitas of being a President Trump, the human being, the individual, to execute this in tandem? Or no, like in theory, you could see another president who could have been president right now, which probably would have been a Democrat or a Republican who had never been in the White House before. Could you see someone who had never been in the White House in their first 6 months in the Oval making this type of monumental decision? I mean, the answer might be yes, but it's just hard to fathom.
No, not at all. Especially understanding the complexity of the Republican Party right now. I don't do politics. I do the
Right.
study of war. No, I don't think anybody, any other individual or any other president would have made the decision to do this operation. Um, and to communicate it so boldly as the president communicates very uniquely to say, I did it. Don't try anything else, or you're going to feel the wrath of the United States. This is a new type of foreign policy, a leadership that people have been asking for a very, very, very long time. And again, facts are facts. People can have their own opinion. You can't have your own facts. This administration, the president's decisions, the way he makes decisions, those are pretty much facts. I mean, he takes what he gets, all the information, tried all the diplomatic means. So it wasn't like this was a rash decision,
Right.
but also shows strategic leadership. So 100% agree with what you're asking. I don't think any other president or any other administration would have made this decision so clearly and created such a immediate result in a better world.
And what if, and I'm asking another what if, but what if things had not gone as smoothly for Israel in the first 10 days as they had, or as successfully? Let's say Israel had, like, from my perspective, that was like a 90-10 like victory, or 95-5 blowout. Let's say it was like 70-30, 65-35, whatever that would have looked like. Do you think it would have been still, President Trump still could have done this, or would have been much harder for him?
I think there's always and this is, again, we go back in history and write this down on what were the contributing factors. I mean, of course, Israel expected to take way worse losses than it did. So absolutely, the successes that Israel was having is a big part of this. Although I understand, it was the United States assisting in defending Israel. It was other countries assisting in defending Israel, and the planning that was done, the military planning that was done, was incredible. None of that was easy or short or simple. You're right. All of these led to the ability to see through the fog. Like what we say in war is that 3/4 of what you know in war is covered in fog. For these leaders, so of course, President Trump, but also the leadership in Israel, making decisions without knowing whether it's going to work or not, having confidence, being prepared, showing, basically strength that leads to peace. I don't know if it would have led to the same sequence of decisions, but it definitely created the opening where the United States could do the operation to assist in a very limited way to achieve the strategic goal. The program's rolled back. A new paradigm has been in place with the treatment of the Islamic regime. It isn't the old business. That was more than one administration. This is a new world. It isn't the old Israel that was watching this giant mammoth of a threat on every border, and people telling them like, you should do this and this and this. Absolutely, all of it contributed to the United States being able to make that decision, and for both Israel, really Israel, to achieve such a strategic goal that was limited in nature, which I have a real problem in my work. I'm convincing people on yes, you can achieve a limited goal in war and achieve a very strategic victory, basically.
I know it's something that, I'm a little torn about, and I know it's being impacted by the media on some level, sadly, right? On the day of that night when President Trump got up and talked about, we'll call it the mammoth victory and the obliteration of Iran's nuclear capabilities versus now the post-game postscript of like, well, set back for 2 years. Well, like not really. Like, what do you make of all that? What do you do with that?
It's frustrating because I mean, war is the pursuit of political goals, so the politics of it is always there, and you have the mainstream media, which you know, I won't be as bold as what the president says about certain channels and publications and things, but they do have basically a rule of thought. And so making the administration or making even war actions look as bad as possible, but it's undeniable. It's an assault on my critical thinking skills to listen to the narrative that was trying to be spun about, well, you only did this, you only did that. Like there's so many elements of strategic victory here that are, of course, the program being rolled back. And it was never to destroy the program. So then they just lie about you didn't achieve your goal. The goal was stopping the clock, halting the clock, pushing it back. So the nuclear scientists that were killed, the sites that were destroyed, the equipment that was destroyed, the narrative that was destroyed that Iran could just negotiate in perpetuity and get economic benefits for that. It's frustrating as just an objective analyst that the narrative that was trying to be spun for political reasons. Like if you can't see the political reason for some of these outlets to start immediately after the operation. Oh, look at the satellite imagery. You didn't do much. It's pretty frustrating because there are some people that just don't have the time to understand, that they work in other fields that's about as wrong. I mean, that dog don't hunt, as another president used to say.
Interesting. What about what you hear about, let's say, the threat of a dirty bomb? That's like kind of still a very real, like a nuclear dirty bomb. I don't know the phraseology, but not launching it, but with ballistic missiles, but suitcase nuclear bomb type of thing.
I know enough and worked enough fields so that defending against things like that there isn't one solution to that. That's many layers, from devices that detect nuclear enriched material to border security to local and law enforcement. There's many layers. Do I think that's a threat? Absolutely. And there are a lot of people, very large organizations that work towards that threat, tracking groups that want to do that, material that you would need, where it would come in. I've been working in this space long enough to know that, of course, that's a threat. Is it an imminent threat, as in like likely versus unlikely? That this is where you invest in national security, you invest in border security and law enforcement and everything, because every part is a vital layer of this layered defense against things like that. The whole suitcase bomb and all this stuff that was a big part of the Cold War. These were the threats of getting these nuclear, and this is why. So we should talk about it, because this is the reason why you can't let a terror regime like the Islamic regime in Iran get nuclear capabilities. Even if it's not an ICBM warhead, but you can have zero enrichment. And I believe that's a great position to have globally.
How do you explain the contrarians who are against this attack, whether they're from the Republican Party or from the Democratic Party, obviously playing games with impeachable feds or the War Powers Act or whatever nonsense people are viewing? How do you understand, like, do they generally not believe the intelligence that Iran wasn't on the cusp of a nuclear reality? I mean, where are people, their heads are in the sand? I mean, like President Obama, for example, like, what did he have a different understanding of, like, just he thought, they had peaceful. I just don't get it. Like, what are people? What are they understanding? Like, what are they thinking?
And there's some people who just hate to hate. There are there's so many different groups within this band of merry fellows
Yeah,
from the very
honestly, I want to pick like the most like innocuous group, like without like malevolent intent or anti-Semitic intent. Just people
yeah.
who, is there such a position that they just didn't like? What would be like just like I don't know, like a rational opinion like that could explain like letting
Yeah,
out.
I live in this world too of schools of thought, right? From international relations to social sciences, that think that you can achieve your goal by other means, like economic sanctions or diplomacy. But I also live in the world of rational thought that facts show that wasn't working. That the Obama JCPOA didn't work. Even just economic sanctions didn't work. You got to cut through the noise of the political aspect of just isn't my team. So I'll say everything I can and spin whatever narrative I can against.
Right.
That's not my team. That's not my president. I don't come from that world, right? My military career it doesn't matter if I voted for him or not. That's our president. These are our values. Intelligence aspects of that. Some people, though, believe the Kool-Aid they drink so much. Doesn't matter what evidence or clear thought you bring against their way of thinking, they'll reject it. From even the anti-war crowd, right? Some of these groups believe that no military force should be used ever. These people are convinced in their own Kool-Aid.
Here, one of the things I read also when people were analyzing, like when the war came to a very sudden, abrupt conclusion, I think it was a little bit shocking for many of us. So some of what you heard was that there was certainly a fear on the Israeli side that their fighter jets could get knocked down or lose a pilot or lose a plane. Like, how realistic, I'm curious from your perspective, again, as a war professional, how realistic would it have been either Israel could have lost a plane or two, or even that, these B-2 bombers, like what type of danger were those pilots in? It was so successful. I don't think anybody thinks about what were the odds or how likely. And maybe as things progressed and it was more and more success, maybe you get more confident. I'm just, from your perspective, help us understand kind of how incredible this really was in terms of what the risks were to these pilots.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question that I deal with a lot, is that there's this expectation of perfection, expectation of a bloodless military operation. The fact that Israel didn't lose a single jet and a single pilot is a miracle.
Really? That's a miracle.
It's just a miracle. I mean, it's just with the scale of the air defenses, the complexity of the air defenses that Iran had, it's a miracle that,
even though they were knocked out like previously.
I mean, even with all of that, I understand the depth of the capability and the amount of work that was done that was 24 hours a day. There's some recent reporting about the number of photos, satellite imagery taken of Iran before and during the operation to track missile launchers, to track air defense systems. This stuff is mobile too. I mean, there's radar and all this stuff. The fact that Israel didn't lose a single jet or pilot is miraculous. But where I study war, I also don't want people thinking that should be the expectation. Of course, you're going to lose. I just got back from India, where for some reason the world spun the story that since India lost a plane, they lost, even though they achieved their strategic goal in a 4-day war. Somehow it's very weird about the way people understand a war. If Israel expected to take way more losses in civilian life and in military capability than it did. So it's a miracle, but I caveat that with I don't like this feeling of expectation by societies that military should go to war and there should be zero, an expectation of zero losses. War is it's a wrestling match where both sides are trying to do their best, and you don't know until you engage them how successful you will or will not be. A lot of preparation, planning, and training goes into that, and we should acknowledge the successes and the immense amount of dominance that gets showed. But to then say, well, you lost, if Iran would have knocked down some Israeli planes, I mean, they're not going to touch a B-2 or B-52. But although, like I talked about, the amount of things that went into protecting that package was also beyond what I would have even expected. The amount of work that went into the deception and the package with the 4th gen, 5th generation aircraft that were flying in advance of the world's most preeminent stealth bomber, the care that was taken to make sure there were no losses, and the fact that there was not one U.S. loss despite the size of this package is a miracle, as an example of immense military capability. I don't want people believing this is the expectation for the future of war, though, because it's natural that both sides, both yourselves and your enemy, are trying their best. And like Hamas, if they spend enough time thinking, and every day that's all they eat, sleep, is finding a way to hurt you, they're going to sometimes be able to do that.
Okay, excellent. So as we wind down now, after it's all said and done, like where we stand today, like what's your best guess about what happens next? Like what do you think realistically could happen here?
So this is what I don't like, because I know so much. I've studied so much war that the predicting human behavior, right? Because we say war has a constantly changing character, like the technologies and what Israel did. Like, you just can't imagine that. But it has an enduring nature. It's human, it's political, it's uncertain. So for me to make predictions, I mean, of course, I believe that there's a possibility of entering a new era of peace in the Middle East. That's taken in the whole of not just what Israel's been able to do against these proxies of the Islamic regime, how weakened Iran is at the moment, how the nations of other nations in the Middle East are looking to make historic peace agreements with Israel and with the world and open up everything. I believe we're heading into peace because how dominating the enemies of the region have been, to include Israel. Can I predict, everything from like Elon Musk and Donald Trump having a public fight? I can't predict those. I believe that Israel will come out of this like they have, stronger, and the Middle East will become more peaceful. But there are a lot of, things I don't know what path Iran will take going forward. I don't know if Syria will form into a very strong nation. There's Lebanon, some amazing signs of Lebanese government and army finally saying no to Hezbollah because they've been cut from the resources. Even the political environment in Israel, there's so many cards here. But as an American, I definitely can see the historic nation of so many different agenda policies, from border security to this use of force to send very strong strategic messages, will ripple across the world, but it's the complexity that's hard to calculate. So I'm not going to give you any predictions.
Got it.
Sorry.
Okay. I appreciate that. Okay. Thank you so much. Final question. I always ask my guests just a little bit off topic, a little bit, either what do you do in your spare time, if you have any, or what's something about you that most people wouldn't guess if you're willing to share something?
Sure. Of course, I eat, breathe, and sleep, study, and war, but at the very core of who I am is a father. So in my spare time, not in my spare time, in my primary time, I'm trying to raise individuals of characters that understand the complexity of this and what it means to be an American, what it means to be a good person, to service and duty, everything. So my primary function is to be a father and to be a leader in my family.
John, thank you so much for that and for all that you do for the world. Keep up the great work, being such an articulate spokesperson for helping us lay people understand kind of what's really going on in the world and with wars. And we should be blessed to live in a time where there are no more wars and we can experience lasting peace.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I believe that you can prevent wars through strength, but I also know that only the dead have seen the end of war. So it takes strength to prevent wars.